You know, sometimes you just want to relax and get back to the basics. And there's no better game to help you do that than Soccer, the old NES classic. This game is about as simple as it gets, and it's pretty easy too, especially on the easier difficulty settings. Of course, if you don't mind feeling frustrated, you can also put it on a harder difficulty. But the thing is, no matter how you set this game up, it really is a fun game to play. And sometimes that's what you want, right? Sometimes you just want a game that's fun to play. Sometimes it's not about the big clubs and the big names and the World Cup and the Euros and whatever. Sometimes it's not about the financial management and the morale and you gotta meet with the press and all that junk, you know? Sometimes all you wanna do is just play the game. And that's the thing that the old NES games did the best. Of course, to understand the simple joys of NES Soccer, you've got to understand the video game environment that the game came out in. Early Atari football games looked like this, and the less we say about this, the better. But this arcade game, Tekken World Cup, is much better known. Tekken's game was actually released in January 1986, a few months after Nintendo Soccer came out in Japan, but it gives you an idea of what the hardware of the time was capable of doing. Of course, the reason why I bring that game up is because it really wouldn't be fair to compare Nintendo Soccer to something like, you know, modern FIFA or PES or whatever. Even comparing it with Sensible Soccer really isn't that fair. Nintendo's game was really intended to be a simple arcade game. Tekken World Cup, which is an arcade game, actually looks a little bit better in my opinion, but Nintendo's game is easier to follow and it's considerably slower, and in this case that's a good thing. This is another reason why World Cup Carnival was so disappointing. In theory, it's a lot like Nintendo's game with only a few players per side and with simplified gameplay. However, this game is a mess. I mean, your teammates just stand there. The graphics are absolute garbage. This is really bad for a game that came out in early 1986. The play control really sucks, and the game just isn't any fun. But that's not to say that Nintendo didn't have any competition. Football games were common on home computers and consoles back in those days. And there are quite a few games from that old era that honestly I haven't really played yet. Nintendo Soccer, though, really does stand out, even if it doesn't look like all that much today. So as you can see here, you've got, 7 teams to choose from, as well as 5 skill levels and 3 different half durations. It's a pretty straightforward game where the A button shoots and the B button passes. Meanwhile, when you're on defense, the A button kicks the ball or something like that, and the B button changes your control to the guy closest to the ball. You're also supposed to use the control pad to choose where you shoot the ball, which doesn't really work all that well. Of course, if you've got the game on the easiest setting, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, it's really easy and simple, but with just one problem. The problem is that you're controlling your keeper at the same time as the guy that you're controlling. That leads us to situations like this, where I'm concentrating on trying to win the ball back and wind up giving up a silly goal. This example is even more obvious, and there really wasn't much I could do. Even on the easiest setting, it's easy to make a mistake and wind up in that situation. But honestly, that's really the only flaw that this game has. Well, that plus the fact that it was kind of behind the times. But that actually is another thing that we need to talk about. In other words, we need to talk about when this game actually came out in North America. There's no dispute at all about the Japanese release, of course. Soccer was released in Japan on April 9th, 1985, and we've actually got evidence of this. Like pretty much all of the other Famicom games from those early years, Soccer was really simple, using only 40 kilobytes of combined ROM, which, by the way, is exactly how much Super Mario Bros. Used. There was also no special mapper, since this game came out just a few months before companies started to experiment with mappers which would extend the memory capability of the system. And that's another story for another time. There's not really that many Nintendo football games, like soccer games that is, that make effective use of those mappers, and it's kind of a problem, right? So American football fans got Tecmo Super Bowl, right, which uses a mapper and which is an absolutely amazing game for the NES. As far as the soccer or these football games are concerned, there really wasn't that much. There was like Goal and Goal 2, and I mean, they all suck. Anyway, this confusion comes up because Soccer was actually a black box Nintendo game here in North America. So what I mean by black box is that this is one of the original NES releases, like going back to 1985. But it's really confusing because everything you'll find on the web, including Wikipedia, claims that it came out in 1987. The NES card database, for example, clearly states that Soccer came out in March 1987, despite the obvious fact that it's a black box game. The card itself makes it obvious that we're talking black box. This is the first run of NES games. Of course, the cartridge itself was exactly the same as the Famicom version. In fact, I really do suspect that there are probably some soccer carts out there with the famous Famicom converter attached. So like maybe one of you NES collectors who know about this sort of thing and who like do the thing where you weigh it and figure out if there's more in the cartridge or whatever, maybe you guys can enlighten us in the comments. Anyway, I think the problem comes from the Wikipedia page, which cites that March 1987 release date. That page, in turn, cites this Wii Virtual Console listing from 2006 from Nintendo's website, which claims that the game was released in March 1987. The problem, however, is that Soccer is often listed on Black Box NES collectors' websites as one of the original 17 games on the console. If that's correct, then there should be editions of Soccer out there with the early Game Box variants, and that would also mean it was first released in October 1985. Of course, the easiest way to solve this is to simply look at old Nintendo advertisements from 1985, and it just so happens that I have access to a lot of this stuff. So look at this. This is an advertisement for the Nintendo Video Robot Entertainment System from the Central New Jersey Home News on December 12, 1985. And yes, Soccer is one of the 14 cartridges listed, and notice that there's only 14 here, not 17. This Macy's Christmas 1985 ad from the New York Daily News features a prominent photo of Rob the Robot. Look closely though, and you'll see that Black Box Soccer is listed for only $25, not a bad price. Consumer Catalog Showrooms over on Staten Island had this listing from Thanksgiving 1985. Look closely and you'll see that Soccer was listed among the games, and hey, for a few bucks off. And of course, Gimbals wasn't about to let Macy's dominate the early NES market. Look closely and you'll see it. Soccer for sale for $24.99. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, that settles it. The more that you look, the more that you're going to see this. Nintendo was wrong, Wikipedia is wrong. Now, I'm not going to go try to change Wikipedia myself since I think this actually counts as original research, and I'm not interested in figuring out the rules or whatever. Let all the geeks go do that, right? You guys go do the dirty work for me. Now, the other thing you need to know, though, about Nintendo Soccer is that there was also an arcade version, though I think most people out there don't really know about this one. The Versus system was a series of arcade machines that Nintendo made that basically utilized NES technology. As you can see from this ad, the idea was that the companies would buy the machine and all the software would come for free, plus this served as advertising for Nintendo's new system in North America. Alternatively, you could get Soccer alone for only $295, provided that you already had the machine. And note here the summer 1985 release date, which is also different from Wikipedia. The system looks sort of like this, with two controllers that were basically arcade-style NES controllers. And the game itself was the same as the cartridge game, except I think at least it's a little bit slower. And honestly, it's also a lot more fun, like there's an actual point to it. In fact, I really think that the Versus arcade version of Soccer is the game you should play. Everything looks the same except that the game prompts you for a coin instead of pushing start. It's basically the same game with the same graphics, except that you've got this point system on the upper left. You lose points for giving up a goal, and you gain them for scoring one. And your points are the thing that tells you how much time you've got left on your current coin, so you want to keep that points total as high as you can. Now this system actually works well since it rewards you for playing the game well, and it gives you an incentive to try hard. I prefer this system to systems like in Versus RBI Baseball. If you've played that one, in that game the game will bug you like every 2 to 3 innings to give it another coin, regardless of how well or poorly you're doing. In this one, it at least feels like you've got a chance to just keep going for free. And the game is pretty good about prompting you for a new coin. The only stupid thing is that the game stops for a second, which makes you lose your momentum. Anyway, in my playthrough, I gave up a really stupid goal right before the end of the second half, since I forgot that I controlled the keeper and the player at the same time. But we came back in dramatic fashion, scoring a goal within seconds. We played to a standstill after that, sending us to the inevitable penalty shootout. Yep, a penalty shootout in a 1985 Nintendo game. What a world, right? Who would have thought? There's a bunch of cool stuff in this game, including like throw-ins, there's corners, offside calls, there's even indirect free kicks. It's pretty advanced for a game from 1985 with like basically no memory, and it's a good testament to the hard work that the guys at Nintendo did. Anyway, I didn't know what I was doing, but I wound up scoring anyway. And it turns out that it's pretty easy to defend in the penalty shootout. When we scored this third goal, the game was basically over. I'm not sure if I was on a really easy mode or whatever, but I was able to stop all 3 of the computer's shots without any problem. Anyway, the players danced, and then the game moved on to the next challenge. And I think you could keep playing this game indefinitely if you really wanted to. Well, I'm not going to do that though, at least not this time. I mean, winning one game, at least for now, is fine. But overall, I do have to say that this really is a very well-designed game. It's simple, it will feel archaic, but it really is a lot of fun. You should give it a chance. So if you're sick of like 3D games, you're sick of Football Manager, you don't want to play sensible soccer anymore, give this one a try. And it's even better 2-player.